Troy's refusal was a bucket of ice water over Ron's head. The words hung in the air like a damning verdict, cutting deeper than any physical blow. His heart pounded against his ribs, each beat echoing Troy's words. Old. Refuse. Adults. The humiliation, already simmering, started to boil over. Ron felt his face flush, the heat of his rage burning behind his eyes. Fine, he spat out, the single word laden with resentment. Just fine. He turned abruptly, walking away without a backwards glance. Troy's refusal had stung him, but the patronizing tone of his words felt even worse. He'd been reduced to a pathetic old man, a joke. The laughter and shared glances he imagined were directed at him at the factory seemed to prove it true. His hands clenched at the thought, the edge of his key digging into his palm. As he climbed into his truck, he fought back against the unwelcome sting of tears. This wasn't about a mere Facebook woman anymore. This was about his dignity, his self-respect. He wouldn't let Troy walk away, scot-free, not after everything. I'll show him, he muttered to himself, the truck roaring to life beneath him. The dark silhouette of the restaurant loomed in his rearview mirror, a constant reminder of the struggle that had become his life. Ron was not sure what he would do, but he knew that he wouldn't let this go. A plan began to formulate in the back of his mind, like a creeping shadow. It was a dark and uncharacteristic path, but his resentment fueled him. As he drove off into the chilly night, the illuminated sign of Steve's Soul Food faded into the distance, taking with it the last remnants of his old life. This was a new Ron, one molded by betrayal and hardened by humiliation. He would have his revenge. It was just a matter of time. The tension in Steve's Soul Food didn't dissipate with Ron's departure. It hung thick in the air, filling the space he'd left behind. The room, once filled with lively chatter, had fallen silent at the sudden outburst. Conversations had stilled, utensils had stopped clinking, and even the sizzle from the kitchen seemed to have quieted down. All eyes were on Troy, who stood rooted to his spot, his face pale under the harsh, fluorescent light. Troy stared at the door, his mind racing to catch up with the whirlwind of events. He could still feel the echoes of Ron's rage and the sting of his challenge. He couldn't shake off the way Ron's eyes had hardened, the intensity in them speaking volumes. And he couldn't ignore the chilling promise of revenge hanging in the air. There was an uncomfortable shift around him as people started murmuring, returning slowly to their meals. The normal sounds of the restaurant gradually resumed, but the evening's cheer had dimmed, replaced by a muted apprehension. Roman broke the silence. "You okay, Troy?" Troy turned to him, his face reflecting a mix of emotions. Shock, guilt, and a hint of regret. "Yeah, Roman. I didn't see that coming." Roman patted Troy on the back, a sympathetic frown on his face. Ron's hot-headed. He'll cool down. Troy nodded, although he wasn't as sure as Roman. This wasn't just about Ron's anger. This was about a deep-seated betrayal that he had unintentionally inflicted upon his friend. He knew Ron. When Ron got an idea into his head, it was like a dog with a bone. He wouldn't let it go. As Troy gazed at the empty chair where Ron had sat just minutes before, a sense of unease washed over him. The echoes of their argument were still ringing in his ears, the ominous undercurrent of Ron's last words resonating ominously. Tonight had shifted something in their friendship, and Troy couldn't help but feel a chill at the thought of what might come next. In the dim lighting of the bar, surrounded by the comforting aroma of comfort food, Troy was suddenly confronted by the cold reality of his strained relationship with Ron. It was a sobering end to an evening that had begun like any other, but was now foreshadowing events that Troy had never anticipated. Ron's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he navigated the dark streets towards his home. His heartbeat still echoed in his ears, the adrenaline from the confrontation with Troy making his senses unusually sharp. Every honk, every glare of oncoming headlights, every flicker of a street lamp seemed heightened. His mind was a battleground of emotions, dominated by the stinging humiliation that Troy had inflicted upon him. The words Troy had hurled were as clear as if he had just spoken them. Comments about his age, appearance, and past actions. Accusations that hadn't just pricked his pride, but ripped it apart. His thoughts drifted to the woman on Facebook, the young, enchanting woman who had become the epicenter of this discord. A bitter laugh escaped his lips as he thought about how a virtual relationship had stirred such palpable emotions. But she wasn't just any woman. She was his solace, his escape from reality, a reality that seemed increasingly gloomy. Troy's betrayal, his words, his refusal to fight, they all churned within Ron, boiling his anger and frustration. His foot pressed down harder on the accelerator, the engine's roar reflecting his internal turmoil. He had wanted a fight, a physical confrontation where he could vent his rage and assert himself. Troy's refusal felt like another slap to his already wounded pride. As he approached his house, the sight of the darkened windows sparked a sense of dread within him. His marital discord seemed to await him behind those closed doors, casting a dark shadow over his life. His feelings for his wife had been overshadowed by his online escapade, and now it seemed to be falling apart like a house of cards. He parked the car in the driveway, his hands lingering on the steering wheel. He stared at the house, his mind filled with chaotic thoughts. His confrontation with Troy, his distraught wife, the Facebook woman, his own bruised ego. But amongst the chaos, a dark resolve was taking shape. Revenge was not a question of if but when and how. As he stepped out of the car, the cool night air seemed to harden his resolve. The drive home, usually a time of reflection and relaxation, had tonight become a crucible for his seething emotions. He walked towards his house, the darkness swallowing him, echoing the looming darkness in his mind. Quietly, Ron entered his home, the echoes of Troy's insults still ringing in his ears. He made his way up the creaky staircase to the bedroom he shared with his wife. The room was dark, save for the moonlight peeking through the slightly parted curtains. He cast a glance at the bed, seeing the silhouette of his sleeping wife. The sight of her stirred a cocktail of emotions in him. Guilt, regret, resentment, all overlaid with a sense of foreboding. He moved to the closet, a grim determination guiding his actions. Hidden behind rows of shirts and a stack of dusty old boxes was a locked case, its existence known to him alone. It was a relic of his past, a remnant of his days spent in the army, his Mortein rifle. He retrieved the case, his fingers tracing the cold metal locks, a surge of nostalgia washing over him. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he unlocked the case. The rifle lay inside, polished and preserved, a deadly artifact of his past. He picked it up, the familiar weight stirring memories of his youth and former strength. A dangerous glint appeared in his eyes as he loaded the rifle, the metallic click echoing in the silence. His heart pounded in his chest as he looked at the loaded rifle. He was not a man prone to violence, but tonight was different. Tonight was different. Tonight, the embers of anger and betrayal had fanned into a dangerous flame, one that seemed to find solace in the ominous presence of the weapon. With the loaded rifle in hand, he moved towards his car parked outside, the chill of the night air seeming to mirror the icy resolve that had formed within him. He placed the rifle carefully in the passenger seat, a dark omen of his perilous intentions. The sight of his home in the rearview mirror seemed almost surreal as he sat in his car. The loaded rifle, the discord, the impending revenge. It all felt like he was caught in a storm of his own making. But the storm was here, and Ron seemed ready to navigate it. Consequences be damned. As he pulled out of his driveway, his face hardened, reflecting the dangerous path he was embarking upon.